Welcome to the Thursday edition of the Spark Creativity Teacher Podcast, a podcast for English teachers in search of creative teaching strategies. Whether you're new to the show or a longtime listener, I'm so glad you're here for today's edition of Highly Recommended. This week, I want to share one of my very favorite recent reads, Alone by Megan E. Freeman. I picked up this book after hearing what a smash hit it was with Caitlin Laura's seniors back when I interviewed her for our episode about verse novel book clubs. If a ton of seniors loved the book and it was a middle school appropriate protagonist, I figured it was a must read. A good book for middle school and high school? Count me in. I knew what was coming to some extent because Caitlin had told me a little bit about it. I had seen it on the Instagram. And so I knew it was a survival story. I knew it was set in a dystopian future, and I knew that it was a novel in verse, which is a genre that really intrigues me. I think it's such a great choice for many students. So I picked it up and I read it in just 2 days, loving it every bit as much as I expected. It's a compelling book, a dramatic book, a lyrical book. And one of my favorite things about it, it manages to maintain suspense without being over the top, frightening, or gory. I've often seen the book compared to Hamlet, but for me, it felt pretty different. I loved Hamlet when I was a kid. I think Gary Paulson is wonderful, but this book felt different to me, maybe because it was so much more familiar. I could relate to it more. In Hamlet, the character crashes in a plane onto an island where he's like completely alone in nature. He has to survive in a world that feels pretty different from our day-to-day for most of us readers. Whereas in Alone, 12-year-old Maddie must survive in her own city, in her own neighborhood, in her own house. So she is there in these really familiar surroundings that many of us can relate to, and yet no one else is there. Every other citizen of her city, apparently of her state, has been evacuated for some kind of mysterious national emergency. And that mysterious national emergency is basically the main element of dystopia in the book. It doesn't feel super dystopian. It feels a lot more like, Maddie surviving on her own. She is accidentally left behind. And as you read, it's really easy to start imagining what you would do in the same situation. If you were alone in your city, what would you do? Where would be the first place you would go? How would you entertain yourself? What would you worry about? It kind of unfolds in my mind anyway, as a reader at the same time that she's figuring it out. And I think that makes it a lot more exciting. My guess is that makes it a lot more exciting for students. Besides loving the book and the plot of the book, I appreciated the way Megan Freeman talked about her process at the end of the book, especially the way she shared that she started by writing her book in prose, and then she adapted it to verse. And she shares a whole section of the book that she wrote in prose and then her adaptation into verse. And I would definitely share that with students if I was reading this book in class. I might even want to share that with students if I was reading any novel in verse in class, or ask kids to take a section of a book that I was reading with them and adapt it into verse, or take a section of a verse novel and adapt it into prose. I feel like there are some really fun creative writing assignments that could come out of this idea and this example that Megan Freeman shared at the end of the book. It could be a great project for novel in verse book clubs or any class novel in verse. So if you've got a couple of hours in a hammock, beach, or cozy couch available this week, I highly recommend reading Alone by Megan E. Freeman and thinking about how to incorporate it into your book clubs, First Chapter Friday program, or choice reading library. Thanks so much for joining me today to talk about one of my favorite recent reads. I hope you'll love it too. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay creative.